How to understand anyone instantly. Introduction. What if every conversation revealed far more than the words being spoken? Imagine walking into a room full of strangers and, within moments, sensing who feels confident, who is hiding anxiety, who genuinely welcomes your presence, and who is simply wearing a carefully constructed mask. It may sound like an extraordinary ability, but it isn't magic. It isn't mind reading, and it certainly isn't guesswork. It's the result of understanding the psychology behind human behavior. Every glance, every pause, every shift in posture, every change in tone, every subtle expression that appears for only a fraction of a second is carrying information. Most people never notice these signals because they're focused entirely on what is being said. Yet beneath every sentence lies another conversation, one spoken without words. For thousands of years, human beings relied on this silent language long before spoken language became sophisticated. Our ancestors survived by recognizing danger, trust, fear, confidence, and intention through movement, facial expressions, and vocal cues. That ancient system never disappeared. It still shapes every interaction we have today. The difference is that most people have forgotten how to read it. Throughout this audiobook, you'll discover the psychological principles that help explain why people behave the way they do. You'll learn how body language reflects emotion, why facial expressions often reveal feelings before words do, how tone of voice can communicate more than an entire sentence, why tiny behavioral changes sometimes expose emotional conflict, and how understanding these signals can help you build stronger relationships, avoid manipulation, and communicate with greater confidence. This journey is not about judging people. It isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone you meet. And it certainly isn't about manipulating others. Instead, it's about developing awareness, because awareness creates understanding. Understanding creates empathy, and empathy creates genuine human connection. The more accurately you understand what others are experiencing, the more wisely you'll respond. You'll become calmer during difficult conversations, more confident in social situations, more attentive to emotions that often go unnoticed. And perhaps most importantly, you'll begin to understand yourself just as deeply as you understand everyone else. Welcome to this exploration of human psychology, a journey where every conversation becomes richer, every interaction becomes more meaningful, and every person becomes a story waiting to be understood. Let's begin. Hidden language of human behavior. Long before a person speaks, their body has already begun telling a story. Before a greeting, before a handshake, before a single sentence leaves their lips, countless signals have already reached your brain. The way they walk into the room, the speed of their movements, the position of their shoulders, the direction of their gaze, the expression resting naturally on their face. Every one of these details quietly communicates something. Most people never notice them, not because the signals are hidden, but because they've never learned where to look. The truth is that human beings were reading one another long before spoken language ever existed. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on quickly recognizing whether another person was a friend or a threat. There were no long conversations, no explanations, only movement, only posture, only instinct. A slight shift in someone's stance could signal danger. Relaxed shoulders could communicate safety. A calm approach might invite trust. Those ancient survival instincts still exist today. Although the world has changed dramatically, our brains continue interpreting these silent messages every second of every day. Without realizing it, you've been reading people your entire life. The question is simply, how accurately? Every movement has meaning. Think about the last time someone walked into a room where you were sitting. Within only a few seconds, you probably formed an impression. Maybe they seemed confident. Maybe they appeared nervous. Perhaps they looked friendly. Or maybe something about them immediately made you cautious. What's fascinating is that these impressions usually form before a single word is exchanged. Why? Because human communication extends far beyond language. Research consistently suggests that nonverbal communication plays a major role in how we understand one another. Our posture, our facial expressions, our gestures, our tone of voice. Together, they create a silent conversation that accompanies every spoken sentence. Sometimes, that silent conversation is even more powerful than the words themselves. Small changes often reveal big emotions. Imagine someone smiling warmly while speaking to you. Everything appears perfectly normal. Then, for just a fraction of a second, their smile fades, their eyebrows tighten, their lips press together. Almost immediately, the smile returns. Most people never notice that brief change. But those tiny moments often reveal genuine emotion before conscious control has time to take over. These rapid emotional flashes are known as microexpressions. They appear naturally, disappear almost instantly, and frequently communicate feelings people never intended to reveal. That doesn't mean they're lying, nor does it mean they're trying to deceive you. It simply means emotion often moves faster than conscious thought. This is one reason psychologists, behavioral scientists, and investigators have spent decades studying nonverbal communication, because emotions often leave traces even when words attempt to hide them. Professionals observe more than they listen. Imagine an experienced behavioral analyst interviewing someone. They aren't focused only on the answers. They're paying attention to everything surrounding those answers. Does the person's posture suddenly change? Does their breathing become faster? Do their hands become restless? Does their voice lose its natural rhythm? Perhaps someone confidently says, "I'm completely comfortable," yet their fingers begin tapping against the table. Their shoulders become tense. Their breathing grows noticeably shorter. Again, none of these behaviors prove dishonesty, but they do suggest that something emotional is happening beneath the surface. Experienced observers don't search for lies. They search for inconsistencies, moments where words and behavior no longer seem perfectly aligned. Those moments invite curiosity, not immediate judgment. Every person has a baseline. One of the most important principles in understanding people is learning what normal looks like for them. Psychologists often describe this as establishing a behavioral baseline. A baseline is simply the way someone naturally behaves when they feel relaxed, comfortable, and emotionally balanced. Some people always speak quickly. Others naturally pause before answering. Some constantly gesture with their hands. Others remain almost completely still. None of these behaviors are unusual if they've always been there. The real insight appears when behavior suddenly changes. A calm person begins fidgeting. A confident speaker becomes unusually quiet. Someone who normally maintains eye contact suddenly avoids it. These changes don't automatically reveal deception, but they often reveal emotional change. And emotional change is always worth noticing. Context changes everything. Many beginners make the same mistake. They assume every gesture has one fixed meaning. Reality is far more complex. Crossed arms may suggest discomfort, or perhaps the room is simply cold. A person may avoid eye contact because they're anxious, or because they're carefully thinking before answering. Someone tapping their foot may be impatient or simply excited. Behavior should never be separated from context. The surrounding situation always matters: the environment, the relationship, the emotional pressure. Only when those pieces come together does behavior begin making sense. Without context, even accurate observations can become inaccurate conclusions. Patterns. Tell the real story. Think of human behavior like pieces of a puzzle. One piece reveals very little. 10 connected pieces reveal much more. Suppose someone crosses their arms. By itself, that tells you almost nothing. Now imagine they also lean away, avoid eye contact, answer with unusually short responses, and repeatedly glance toward the exit. Together, those behaviors begin forming a pattern. Professional observers rarely focus on isolated gestures. Instead, they collect multiple observations before reaching any conclusion. The goal isn't to find evidence that supports an assumption. The goal is to understand the complete picture. Nash mirroring, a silent sign of connection. Have you ever noticed two close friends sitting in almost identical positions? One leans forward. Moments later, the other does the same. One smiles. The other smiles almost instantly. This natural imitation is known as mirroring. When people feel comfortable with one another, their bodies often begin reflecting each other's movements without conscious awareness. Mirroring is one of the strongest indicators of rapport. It quietly communicates agreement, comfort, and connection. When that mirroring suddenly disappears, it may suggest that something within the interaction has changed. Not necessarily conflict, but perhaps uncertainty, distance, or shifting emotions. Observation begins with empathy. Learning to read people isn't about becoming suspicious, nor is it about gaining power over others. Its real purpose is understanding. Every behavior has a reason. Every emotional reaction has a story. Sometimes people smile because they're genuinely happy. Sometimes they smile because they're trying to stay strong. Sometimes silence reflects wisdom. Other times, it reflects pain. The more carefully you observe, the more compassion naturally replaces assumption, because behind every gesture, there is a human experience. Final reflection. Every person you meet is communicating far more than they realize, not only through words, but through posture, movement, facial expressions, breathing, tone, and countless small behaviors that quietly reveal emotional truth. The people who understand others best aren't necessarily the ones who ask the most questions. They're the ones who notice the details everyone else overlooks. Because reading people isn't about discovering secrets, it's about becoming present enough to truly see another human being. And once you begin paying attention, you'll realize that every conversation has always contained two languages: the one we choose to speak and the one our bodies have been speaking all along. Chapter 3: Body Language, the silent messenger of the mind. Imagine watching two people talking across a busy street. You can't hear a single word. Cars pass by. People walk between them. The conversation is completely silent from where you stand. And yet, within only a few moments, you probably have a sense of what's happening. One person seems excited. The other appears hesitant. Perhaps one is trying to convince, while the other remains unconvinced. How can you know that without hearing a single sentence? Because the human body is constantly communicating. In many ways, our bodies begin speaking long before our mouths ever do. Every movement, whether intentional or unconscious, becomes part of an invisible conversation that unfolds alongside our words. Learning to understand that silent conversation is one of the most valuable communication skills anyone can develop. Your body is always speaking. Unlike spoken language, body language rarely requires conscious effort. Most people never think about where they're placing their hands, how they're sitting, where their feet are pointing, or how quickly they're moving. These behaviors happen naturally. They're guided by emotion more than intention. That's why body language often provides valuable insight into what someone may be experiencing internally. It doesn't reveal absolute truth, but it frequently reveals emotional direction. The body responds to feelings much faster than the conscious mind can edit them. And because of that, it quietly communicates information every second of every interaction. Confidence has its own rhythm. Think about someone who walks into a room with genuine confidence. They don't rush, but they don't hesitate either. Their movements appear smooth. Their shoulders remain relaxed. Their head stays upright. Their breathing follows a steady rhythm. Notice something important. Real confidence rarely demands attention. It doesn't need dramatic gestures or exaggerated movements. People who truly feel comfortable with themselves usually appear calm rather than loud. Now compare that with someone feeling uncertain. They may pull their shoulders inward, lower their head slightly, keep their hands close to their body, or repeatedly adjust their clothing without realizing it. These aren't signs of weakness. They're natural protective behaviors. When people feel emotionally vulnerable, the body often tries to make itself appear smaller and less noticeable. Open body language encourages connection. One of the easiest patterns to recognize is the difference between open and closed posture. Open body language usually communicates comfort. The arms remain relaxed. The shoulders stay loose. The hands are visible. The body naturally faces the person speaking. These signals often make conversations feel welcoming. Closed posture often looks different. Arms folded tightly across the chest, legs turned away, hands hidden inside pockets, the upper body leaning backward. Many people immediately assume this means someone is defensive. Sometimes that's true, but not always. Perhaps they're cold. Perhaps they're simply sitting comfortably. Perhaps they've crossed their arms out of habit. The important lesson is this: never judge one behavior by itself. Meaning comes from patterns, not isolated gestures. The feet often reveal intention. Surprisingly, one of the most honest parts of the body is also one of the least noticed: the feet. While people consciously manage their facial expressions and carefully choose their words, very few pay attention to where their feet naturally point. When someone enjoys a conversation, their feet often point toward the other person. When they're preparing to leave, their feet may gradually turn toward the nearest exit, even while they continue smiling and speaking. This doesn't necessarily mean they're bored. Perhaps they're late for another appointment. Perhaps they're thinking about something else. The body often begins preparing for action before the mind puts those intentions into words. Hands reveal emotional energy. Hands are among the most expressive parts of the human body. Watch someone telling a story they're passionate about. Their hands naturally become more animated. They emphasize ideas, illustrate movement, support their words. Now imagine someone becoming nervous. They may begin rubbing their palms together, touching their face, adjusting a watch, playing with a ring, tapping their fingers, holding one hand with the other. These actions are often called self-soothing behaviors. When emotional tension increases, the nervous system instinctively searches for ways to calm itself. Again, these movements don't automatically indicate deception. They simply suggest that emotion has become stronger. That's an important distinction. Good observers don't jump to conclusions. They become curious. Personal space tells its own story. Every conversation takes place inside an invisible bubble. Psychologists call this personal space. Although the exact distance varies across cultures, the principle remains remarkably consistent. When people feel comfortable with someone, they naturally allow them closer. When they feel uncertain, they often create more distance. Think about greeting a close friend. You probably stand much nearer than you would when meeting a stranger for the first time. Neither distance is right or wrong. They simply reflect different levels of familiarity and trust. The body quietly adjusts itself according to emotional comfort, long before words explain the relationship. Mirroring creates invisible connection. Have you ever noticed two close friends laughing together, both leaning forward at exactly the same moment? Or a couple sitting in a cafe, holding their coffee cups in almost identical ways? This natural synchronization is called mirroring. When people genuinely connect, their bodies often begin copying each other's movements without conscious awareness. One crosses a leg. A few moments later, the other does the same. One smiles. The other responds almost immediately. Mirroring is one of the strongest indicators of rapport. It doesn't happen because people are pretending. It happens because the human brain naturally seeks social harmony. When mirroring appears, it often suggests comfort, trust, shared attention. When it suddenly disappears, it may indicate that the emotional atmosphere has changed. Movement reflects emotion. Emotion changes not only posture, but movement itself. Someone who feels relaxed usually moves at a steady, comfortable pace. An anxious person may move more quickly, shift positions frequently, tap their feet, adjust their sleeves, or repeatedly check their phone. On the other hand, someone experiencing sadness may move more slowly than usual. Their gestures become smaller. Their posture grows heavier. Even ordinary movements begin reflecting emotional weight. The body and mind are constantly influencing one another. What we feel changes how we move. And surprisingly, how we move can also influence how we feel. Clusters matter more than individual gestures. Imagine trying to understand an entire novel after reading only one sentence. You wouldn't have enough information. Body language works exactly the same way. One crossed arm means very little. One glance away means very little. One nervous laugh means very little. But when several behaviors appear together, their meaning becomes much clearer. Suppose as someone avoids eye contact, crosses their arms, leans backward, answers more briefly than usual, and repeatedly looks toward the door. Each behavior alone explains very little. Together, they suggest an emotional shift worth paying attention to. Professional behavioral observers don't search for isolated clues. They study clusters, patterns, consistency. That's where real understanding begins. Observe yourself before observing others. Perhaps the best place to study body language is your own body. The next time you feel nervous, pause for a moment. Notice your shoulders, your breathing, your hands, your posture. When you're excited, observe how differently you move. When you're calm, notice the rhythm of your breathing. The more familiar you become with your own nonverbal habits, the easier it becomes to recognize them in others. Self-awareness strengthens social awareness. The better you understand yourself, the more accurately you'll understand everyone around you. final reflection. Your body is always telling a story. Sometimes it speaks of confidence, sometimes of uncertainty, sometimes of excitement, sometimes of fear. Most of these messages are incredibly subtle, so subtle that the person sending them often has no idea they're communicating at all. The goal isn't to analyze every movement, nor is it to become suspicious. The goal is to become more attentive, more patient, more present, because every conversation contains two languages, the spoken language and the silent language of the body. The more fluently you learn to understand both, the more deeply you'll connect with the people around you. And perhaps, for the first time, you'll begin noticing what has been there all along, quietly waiting to be seen. Chapter 4. The Power Hidden Within Your Voice. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine receiving a phone call from someone you've known for years. They answer with only 3 simple words: "I'm doing fine." Nothing about those words seems unusual, yet almost instantly, you know something isn't right. Perhaps their voice sounds heavier than usual. Maybe they speak more slowly, or there's a hesitation between each sentence that wasn't there before. Without seeing their face, without observing their body language, you've already sensed their emotional state. How? Because the human voice carries far more than language. Every conversation contains 2 messages. The first is delivered through words. The second is delivered through the way those words are spoken. More often than we realize, the second message is the one people truly remember. Your voice is an emotional fingerprint. No 2 voices are exactly alike. Each person has a unique rhythm, a natural pace, a preferred tone, a characteristic way of emphasizing certain words. These patterns become part of who we are. Friends recognize us before we even introduce ourselves. Family members can often tell how we're feeling after hearing only a single sentence. That's because our emotions quietly influence the mechanics of speech. When we're relaxed, our breathing becomes deeper, our words flow naturally, the voice sounds steady. But when anxiety appears, everything begins to change. Breathing becomes shorter, the throat tightens slightly, speech may become quicker or unexpectedly slower. Sometimes the changes are so subtle that we barely notice them ourselves, yet the people listening often do. Emotion changes the sound before it changes the words. Think back to a moment when you received wonderful news. Perhaps you achieved an important goal, heard from someone you deeply missed, or experienced an unexpected success. Before you even had time to explain what happened, your voice had already changed. It became brighter, lighter, filled with energy. Now imagine receiving disappointing news. The words may still be calm, but your voice naturally loses some of its strength. It becomes quieter, heavier, more deliberate. These reactions happen automatically. You don't consciously decide to sound excited or disappointed. Emotion influences the voice long before conscious thought begins organizing language. This is why experienced communicators often pay close attention not only to what people say, but also to how they say it. The rhythm of speech reveals mental state. Every person speaks at a different pace. Some naturally talk quickly, others choose their words more carefully. Neither style is better, is recognizing change. Someone who usually speaks slowly may suddenly begin rushing through every sentence when they become nervous. Another person who normally speaks with enthusiasm may grow unusually quiet after receiving difficult news. Sometimes excitement causes speech to accelerate. Ideas seem to arrive faster than words can express them. Other times, stress has exactly the opposite effect. People pause more frequently, search for the right words, restart sentences halfway through. These aren't flaws in communication. They're reflections of what's happening inside the mind. Silence can be more powerful than speech. Many people fear silence. The moment a conversation becomes quiet, they rush to fill the space. But silence is not empty. Often, it carries meaning that words cannot. Imagine asking someone an important question. Instead of answering immediately, they pause. They look down. Take a slow breath. Several seconds pass. That silence tells you something. Perhaps they're choosing their words carefully. Perhaps they're processing emotion. Perhaps they're remembering an experience that isn't easy to describe. Not every pause means the same thing, but every meaningful pause deserves attention. The best listeners understand that silence isn't the absence of communication. It's another form of communication. Volume speaks without asking permission. Have you ever noticed how naturally your voice changes volume depending on your emotional state? Joy often makes us louder. Sadness softens the voice. Confidence usually produces a steady volume. Uncertainty sometimes causes people to lower their voices without realizing it. Even anger doesn't always become louder. Some people become extremely quiet when they're upset. Their words grow slower. Their tone becomes colder. This reminds us of an important lesson. Emotion doesn't follow one universal pattern. Different personalities express the same feeling in different ways. That's why context always matters more than assumptions. A story about Emma. Emma had recently been promoted to lead an important project. She understood every detail of the work. She had prepared carefully. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. But on the morning of her presentation, something unexpected happened. As she stood in front of the room, her voice began speaking faster than she intended. She skipped natural pauses. Her breathing became shallow. By the time the meeting ended, she felt convinced she had performed terribly. Later that afternoon, one of her colleagues approached her. "I really enjoyed your presentation," he said. Emma looked surprised. "I thought everyone could hear how nervous I was." He smiled. "I could tell you cared about doing well. That's very different." That conversation stayed with Emma for years. She realized something important. People rarely judge us as harshly as we judge ourselves. Often, the emotions we believe are obvious are interpreted by others in a far kinder way. Listening beyond the words. The next time someone speaks to you, try listening differently. Notice the rhythm of their sentences, the energy in their voice, the moments when they naturally become more expressive, the moments when their voice grows quieter. Pay attention to what happens when they talk about something meaningful. Compare it with how they sound when discussing something ordinary. Little by little, you'll begin noticing emotional patterns that once passed completely unnoticed. Not because people are trying to reveal themselves, but because authentic emotion naturally leaves traces in every voice. Observation requires compassion. Learning to hear emotion in someone's voice should never become a tool for judgment. Its purpose is understanding. A trembling voice may reflect fear or excitement. A long pause may signal uncertainty or thoughtful reflection. A quiet tone may suggest sadness or simply exhaustion after a difficult day. The goal isn't to decide what another person feels. The goal is to become curious enough to understand them more deeply. The best communicators don't assume. They observe, they listen, and when necessary, they ask gentle questions instead of making quick conclusions. Final reflection. Every voice carries a story, not only through language, but through rhythm, breathing, tone, volume, silence, and emotion. Most people hear the words. Few truly hear the person behind those words. But once you begin listening with greater awareness, conversations begin to change. You notice feelings hidden beneath confident sentences. You recognize hope inside uncertain voices. You hear fatigue behind polite smiles. And perhaps most importantly, you begin offering others something increasingly rare in today's world: your complete attention. Because sometimes, the greatest act of understanding isn't finding the perfect response. It's simply listening carefully enough to hear what another person has been trying to say all along. Chapter 5: Why We Misread People More Often Than We Realize. Imagine meeting someone for the very first time. Within only a few seconds, your mind has already started building a story. They seem confident. They look unfriendly. I don't think I can trust them. The strange part is this: you haven't spoken to them yet. You don't know their background. You know nothing about what kind of day they've had. Yet your brain has already reached several conclusions. This happens to every one of us. Our minds are designed to make quick judgments because, throughout human history, making fast decisions often helped our ancestors survive. But in modern life, those same shortcuts can easily lead us to misunderstand the people around us. Learning to read people isn't only about observing others. It's also about recognizing the mistakes our own minds naturally make. The brain loves shortcuts. Every day, your brain processes an enormous amount of information. Thousands of faces, voices, movements, expressions. If your mind carefully analyzed every detail, even the simplest conversation would become exhausting. Instead, the brain creates shortcuts. Psychologists often refer to these as mental heuristics. They're quick rules that help us make sense of the world. Most of the time, these shortcuts are useful. They allow us to react quickly and make decisions efficiently. But they also have a weakness. They sometimes convince us that we've understood someone when we've actually understood very little. First impressions are powerful. Think back to someone you met years ago. Perhaps your first impression was completely wrong. Maybe they seemed quiet, but later became one of the funniest people you knew. Perhaps someone appeared confident, only for you to discover they struggled with constant self-doubt. First impressions are formed incredibly fast, often within only a few moments. The problem isn't that first impressions exist. The problem is believing they're always accurate. A first impression should be the beginning of observation, not the end of it. Real understanding takes time. We often see what we expect to see. Imagine hearing that a new coworker is difficult to work with. Before you even meet them, your expectations begin influencing your attention. The first time they appear serious, your brain immediately says, "See, I knew they were unfriendly." Meanwhile, you overlook the moments when they smile, offer help, or behave kindly. This tendency is known as confirmation bias. Once we develop an expectation, our minds naturally search for evidence that supports it. At the same time, we often ignore information that challenges our beliefs. This happens without conscious awareness, and it affects every one of us. Labels can change the way we see people. Human beings naturally enjoy putting things into categories: friendly, shy, confident, lazy, intelligent, difficult. These labels make the world feel simpler, but people are rarely that simple. Someone who appears confident at work may feel deeply insecure in social situations. A person who seems quiet during meetings may become incredibly expressive among close friends. Behavior changes with environment, relationships, stress, experience. The more quickly we label someone, the less likely we are to notice the complexity that makes them unique. Context explains more than behavior alone. Imagine walking into a cafe. You notice someone speaking sharply to the cashier. Your first reaction might be, "What a rude person." But imagine learning that they had just left the hospital after receiving devastating news. Would your interpretation change? Probably. The behavior remains exactly the same. Only the context has changed. This reminds us of an important lesson. Behavior rarely tells the whole story. Without understanding the circumstances surrounding it, our conclusions often remain incomplete. Good observers don't ignore behavior. They simply recognize that every behavior exists within a larger story. A lesson from Noah. Noah had recently joined a new company. During his first week, he noticed one colleague who rarely smiled. She answered questions briefly, avoided long conversations, and usually ate lunch alone. Noah quickly concluded that she simply didn't enjoy being around people. Several months later, the company organized a charity event. To Noah's surprise, the same colleague spent the entire afternoon helping new volunteers. She laughed easily, encouraged everyone around her, and spoke with remarkable warmth. Later, Noah learned that she had been caring for a seriously ill parent during her first weeks at work. She wasn't unfriendly. She was exhausted. That experience changed the way Noah viewed people forever. He realized how dangerous it can be to confuse one moment in someone's life with who they truly are. Curiosity is stronger than assumption. The next time you meet someone, try replacing certainty with curiosity. Instead of thinking, "I know what this person is like," ask yourself, "What don't I know yet?" That simple question creates space. Space for new information, space for understanding, space for empathy. Curiosity allows people to surprise us. Assumptions rarely do. Every person is more than one moment. One difficult conversation doesn't define a personality. One mistake doesn't define a character. One bad day doesn't define a life. Every person you meet has lived thousands of experiences you'll never see. Victories, failures, losses, dreams, disappointments. Each one quietly shapes the way they think, speak, and behave. When we remember that, our conversations become gentler, our patience grows, and our understanding becomes far more accurate. Final reflection. Perhaps the greatest obstacle to understanding others is believing we've already understood them. Real observation requires humility. It asks us to slow down, to question our assumptions, to remain open to new information. The more willing you are to replace judgment with curiosity, the more clearly you'll begin seeing the people around you. Because every person is far more complex than a first impression, far richer than a single conversation, and far more interesting than any label could ever describe. True understanding doesn't begin when you find quick answers. It begins the moment you become willing to keep asking better questions. Chapter 6: The Psychology of Trust: Why Some People Earn It Instantly. Have you ever met someone and within only a few minutes felt completely comfortable talking to them? There was no special reason. They weren't trying to impress you. They didn't say anything extraordinary, yet somehow being around them felt effortless. Now think about the opposite experience. Someone who seemed perfectly polite, who smiled at the right moments, who said all the right things, but something still felt distant. You couldn't explain why. You simply never felt completely at ease. Trust often works this way. It doesn't appear because someone asks for it, and it certainly can't be forced. Instead, it develops quietly, through dozens of small signals that the human brain is constantly observing. Long before we consciously decide whether we trust someone, our minds have already begun evaluating them. Trust begins with emotional safety. When psychologists study human relationships, they often discover one recurring pattern. Before people become honest, before they become vulnerable, before they truly open up, they first need to feel safe. Not physically, emotionally. They need to believe they won't immediately be judged. They need to feel heard. They need to know their thoughts will be respected. Without emotional safety, real trust rarely has the chance to grow. This explains why some conversations remain superficial, while others become deeply meaningful. The difference often isn't intelligence or personality. It's whether the people involved create an atmosphere where honesty feels safe. Consistency builds confidence. Imagine crossing a bridge every day. The first time, you step carefully. You pay attention to every movement. The second time, you're still cautious. But after crossing it hundreds of times without any problems, something changes. You stop thinking about the bridge. You simply trust it. Human relationships develop in much the same way. Trust isn't built through one impressive moment. It's built through consistency, keeping promises, arriving when you said you would, following through on your words, responding with honesty, even when it's difficult. Each small action strengthens confidence. Over time, people stop questioning whether they can rely on you because your behavior has already answered that question. Listening creates connection. Many people believe great communication is about speaking well. In reality, some of the most trusted people are exceptional listeners. Think about the last conversation where you felt genuinely understood. Chances are, the other person didn't spend most of the time talking. Instead, they listened carefully. They allowed you to finish your thoughts. They asked thoughtful questions. They didn't interrupt every few seconds. That kind of attention is surprisingly powerful. It communicates respect. It tells the other person what you're saying matters. And when people feel that their experiences matter, trust naturally begins to grow. Authenticity is difficult to fake. People often believe they need to appear perfect in order to earn respect. Psychology suggests the opposite. Authenticity usually creates stronger relationships than perfection ever can. Someone who admits, "I don't know," often appears more trustworthy than someone pretending to have every answer. Someone who accepts responsibility after making a mistake usually earns more respect than someone constantly searching for excuses. Authenticity doesn't mean sharing every private detail of your life. It simply means allowing your words and your actions to remain aligned. People are remarkably good at sensing sincerity, even when they can't explain exactly why. Small actions leave lasting impressions. Trust rarely grows through dramatic gestures. Instead, it develops through ordinary moments. Remembering someone's name, keeping a simple promise, being fully present during a conversation, showing kindness when nothing is expected in return. These actions may seem insignificant, yet together they create a pattern. And patterns shape reputation. Over weeks, months, and years, those small moments become the foundation upon which lasting relationships are built. Daniel's experience. Daniel had recently become the manager of a growing team. He believed leadership meant always having the right answers. Whenever someone brought him a problem, he immediately offered a solution. At first, his team admired his confidence. But something was missing. People stopped sharing new ideas. Meetings became quieter. Employees hesitated before asking questions. One afternoon, an experienced mentor observed one of Daniel's meetings. Afterward, the mentor smiled and said, "You solve problems very quickly. But sometimes, people don't need immediate solutions. They need to feel that someone genuinely understands them first." Those words stayed with Daniel. Over the following months, he made one simple change. Before giving advice, he listened. He asked questions. He allowed silence instead of rushing to fill it. Gradually, his team began speaking more openly. Ideas flowed more naturally. People became more willing to admit mistakes. Daniel hadn't become smarter. He had become more approachable. And that changed everything. Trust requires patience. One honest conversation can begin a relationship. But lasting trust takes time. It grows through repeated experiences. Every meaningful interaction becomes another opportunity to strengthen that connection. Unfortunately, trust can also weaken in the same gradual way. Broken promises, repeated dishonesty, dismissed feelings, small disappointments that seem unimportant in the moment can slowly damage even the strongest relationships. That's why trust isn't something we earn once. It's something we continue building every day. Choosing curiosity over judgment. When misunderstandings happen, our first instinct is often to judge, to defend ourselves, or to assume the worst. But trust grows in a different direction. It grows through curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why would they do that?" try asking, "What might they be experiencing?" That simple shift changes the entire conversation. Curiosity opens doors. Judgment usually closes them. The strongest relationships are rarely those without conflict. They're the ones where people remain willing to understand each other, even during difficult moments. Final reflection. Trust is one of the most valuable things two people can share, yet it cannot be demanded, it cannot be rushed, and it cannot be purchased. It grows quietly, conversation after conversation, choice after choice, moment after moment. Every act of honesty strengthens it. Every act of kindness protects it. Every moment of genuine listening allows it to deepen. When people feel emotionally safe, they stop pretending. They stop hiding behind carefully chosen words. They begin revealing who they truly are. And perhaps that's the greatest reward of understanding human behavior. Not gaining the ability to read people more accurately, but becoming the kind of person others naturally feel safe enough to be themselves around. Chapter 7. The Art of Understanding Others Without Jumping to Conclusions. Have you ever misunderstood someone, only to discover later that you were completely wrong? Perhaps you believed a coworker was unfriendly because they rarely smiled. Later, you learned they were naturally quiet. Maybe you thought someone was ignoring you, when in reality, they were simply overwhelmed by personal challenges you knew nothing about. Experiences like these are surprisingly common. The truth is, human behavior is easy to observe, but much harder to interpret. This is one of the greatest mistakes people make when trying to understand others. They confuse what they see with what they think it means. Learning to read people isn't about making faster judgments. It's about making wiser ones. Behavior is only part of the story. Every action has a reason. Sometimes that reason is obvious. Other times, it's completely invisible. Imagine seeing someone checking their phone repeatedly during a conversation. Your first thought might be, "They're not interested in talking to me." But there are countless other possibilities. Perhaps they're waiting for important medical news. Maybe they're expecting a call from a family member. Or perhaps they're simply nervous and using their phone to reduce anxiety. The behavior hasn't changed. Only your understanding of it has. This is why experienced observers avoid rushing to conclusions. They know behavior provides clues, not complete answers. Emotions are rarely simple. Many people assume emotions exist one at a time. Happy, sad, angry, afraid. Real life is rarely that simple. A graduate may feel proud while simultaneously feeling uncertain about the future. A parent may experience overwhelming joy, mixed with worry. Someone starting a new career might feel excited, yet deeply anxious at the same time. Human emotions often overlap. They influence one another. They change from moment to moment. Understanding people means accepting that emotional complexity is normal. Not every smile represents happiness. Not every silence represents sadness. People often carry several emotions at once. Past experiences shape present behavior. Every person you meet has lived a life you know almost nothing about. Every success, every disappointment, every meaningful relationship, every difficult experience. Together, they quietly shape the way that person responds to the world. Imagine two people hearing the exact same criticism. One accepts it calmly, the other becomes visibly defensive. Why? Because identical situations can trigger completely different emotional memories. Past experiences influence present reactions. This is why understanding behavior requires patience. You rarely know the full story behind another person's response. Pay attention to patterns over time. One conversation tells you very little. 10 conversations tell you much more. Someone may seem unusually quiet today because they didn't sleep well. Someone else may appear impatient because they're under pressure at work. Isolated moments can be misleading. Patterns are far more reliable. If a person's behavior changes consistently over time, that change deserves attention. If it's only one unusual moment, there may be countless explanations. Great observers resist the temptation to form permanent opinions based on temporary situations. They continue watching, continue listening, continue learning. A story about Olivia. Olivia had recently joined a new design company. During her first month, there was one colleague she struggled to understand. He rarely joined conversations, almost never smiled during meetings, and usually left the office as soon as the workday ended. Many people quietly assumed he simply preferred being alone. One afternoon, a major project required everyone to stay late. As the evening continued, Olivia noticed something completely different. Her colleague patiently helped new employees solve technical problems. He encouraged teammates who were feeling stressed. He even stayed long after finishing his own work to make sure everyone else succeeded. Later, Olivia learned that he had spent years caring for an elderly parent after work. His quiet behavior had never reflected a lack of kindness. It reflected responsibility. That experience reminded her of something she would never forget. People often carry responsibilities, worries, and personal challenges that remain completely invisible to everyone around them. Curiosity creates better conversations. Imagine replacing assumptions with questions. Instead of thinking, why are they acting like this? Ask yourself, what might I not understand yet? That single question changes everything. It encourages listening instead of judging, understanding instead of criticizing, connection instead of distance. Curiosity creates opportunities for people to explain themselves. Assumptions rarely do. The strongest communicators don't believe they already know everything. They're willing to discover something new with every conversation. Hack compassion strengthens observation. As your ability to notice behavior improves, something interesting begins to happen. You become less interested in labeling people and more interested in understanding them. Instead of seeing an angry person, you begin wondering what pain they might be carrying. Instead of seeing someone who appears distant, you wonder what responsibilities may be weighing on them. Observation becomes more compassionate, not because you're ignoring difficult behavior, but because you've learned that behavior usually has a deeper cause. Compassion doesn't excuse harmful actions. It simply helps you understand them more completely. Final reflection. Understanding people is not about becoming an expert at judging others. It's about becoming an expert at remaining open-minded. Every conversation offers only a small window into another person's life. Every expression reveals only one moment. Every action tells only part of the story. The more patiently you observe, the more clearly you'll recognize that every person is far more complex than they first appear. Perhaps the greatest skill in human communication isn't knowing exactly what someone is thinking. Perhaps it's having the humility to admit that there's always more to learn. And when we replace certainty with curiosity, we don't just become better observers. We become better friends, better colleagues, better partners, and ultimately, better human beings. Chapter 8. Becoming someone who truly understands people. We've explored facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, trust, the hidden influence of emotions, and the many ways our minds can misinterpret the people around us. By now, you may have realized something surprising. Reading people isn't about discovering secret techniques. It isn't about memorizing dozens of gestures. And it certainly isn't about becoming someone who can instantly know what everyone is thinking. The real skill lies somewhere much deeper. It's learning how to observe with patience, listen with curiosity, and respond with empathy. Because understanding people has never been about collecting clues, it's about seeing the complete human being behind those clues. Observation is a skill that grows with practice. No one becomes an excellent observer overnight, like learning a new language. It develops gradually. The more attention you pay to everyday conversations, the more details you'll naturally begin to notice. Perhaps you'll recognize how someone's posture changes when they become excited, or how their voice softens when discussing someone they deeply care about. You may notice that a confident speaker suddenly becomes hesitant when talking about a painful memory. These observations don't happen because people suddenly become easier to understand. They happen because you've trained yourself to notice what was always there. Observation isn't a talent, it's a habit, and every conversation becomes another opportunity to strengthen it. Learn to be fully present. One of the greatest barriers to understanding others is distraction. While someone is speaking, many people are already preparing their response. They're thinking about what they'll say next, how they'll answer, how they'll explain their own opinion. As a result, they hear the words, but miss the emotion behind them. Being fully present changes everything. When you give someone your complete attention, you begin noticing the pauses between sentences, the subtle changes in their voice, the expressions that appear before they smile, the hesitation before answering an important question. These small moments often reveal more than long explanations ever could. Presence allows observation. Observation creates understanding. Everyone wants to feel understood regardless of age, profession, or background. People share one quiet desire. They want to feel understood, not judged, not corrected, not interrupted, simply understood. Think about the conversations that have stayed with you for years. They probably weren't the ones filled with perfect advice. They were the conversations where someone genuinely listened, where you felt safe enough to speak honestly, where your emotions weren't dismissed or ignored. The ability to create that feeling is one of the greatest communication skills anyone can develop. Because when people feel understood, they naturally become more open, more trusting, more authentic. Understanding yourself comes first. Interestingly, the journey toward understanding others always begins with yourself. Notice how your own body reacts under pressure. Pay attention to the way your voice changes when you're excited. Observe your facial expressions when you're surprised. Recognize the habits you develop when you're nervous. The more familiar you become with your own emotional patterns, the easier it becomes to recognize similar patterns in other people. Self-awareness creates empathy, because once you've experienced your own emotional complexity, you're less likely to oversimplify someone else's. A story about Grace. Grace worked as a teacher for many years. At the beginning of her career, she believed that successful teaching meant having every answer. Whenever a student made a mistake, she corrected it immediately. Whenever someone struggled, she explained the lesson again. Her intentions were good, yet something felt missing. Many students remained quiet. Some rarely asked questions. Others seemed afraid of making mistakes. One afternoon, an older teacher offered her a simple piece of advice. Don't focus only on teaching the lesson. Learn to understand the student. Those words changed Grace's approach completely. Instead of responding immediately, she started observing more carefully. She noticed which students hesitated before speaking, which ones looked anxious during presentations, which ones smiled even when they were frustrated. She began asking gentle questions instead of making quick assumptions. Over time, something remarkable happened. Students became more confident, class discussions became more open, and learning became easier. Not because Grace had become a better lecturer, but because she had become a better listener. She realized that education, like every meaningful relationship, begins with understanding. Curiosity never stops growing. Even after years of studying psychology, the best observers never believe they've learned everything. Every new person brings a different perspective. Every conversation offers another lesson. Every relationship teaches something unexpected. Curiosity keeps the mind open. The moment we believe we've completely figured people out, we stop paying attention. And that's often when misunderstanding begins. Remaining curious doesn't mean doubting everything. It means accepting that human beings are wonderfully complex, always capable of surprising us. The goal was never perfection. You won't understand every emotion correctly. You'll sometimes misread situations. You'll occasionally reach the wrong conclusion. That's part of being human. The goal has never been perfection. The goal is progress, to become a little more patient, a little more attentive, a little more compassionate than you were yesterday. Every thoughtful conversation moves you closer. Every careful observation teaches another lesson. Every meaningful connection strengthens your ability to understand the next person you meet. Final reflection. As this journey comes to an end, remember that every person you encounter is living a life you cannot fully see. Behind every smile, there may be quiet determination. Behind every moment of silence, there may be reflection. Behind every confident appearance, there may be hidden uncertainty. Human behavior is rarely simple, and that's exactly what makes it so fascinating. The more willing you are to observe without rushing, to listen without interrupting, and to understand without immediately judging, the richer every relationship becomes. Because the greatest reward of learning human psychology isn't gaining the ability to read people. It's becoming the kind of person who helps others feel truly seen. And in a world where so many people simply want someone to understand them, that may be one of the most valuable gifts you can ever offer. Final closing. Take one final moment and simply breathe. As you reach the end of this journey, you may realize that the world around you hasn't changed. The people you meet tomorrow will still smile, they'll still laugh, they'll still pause before answering difficult questions. They'll still experience joy, fear, hope, and uncertainty. What has changed is the way you'll begin to notice those moments. Perhaps tomorrow, you'll pay closer attention to someone's tone of voice. You'll recognize a subtle shift in posture. You'll notice the warmth in a genuine smile, or the quiet hesitation before someone shares something deeply personal. Not because you're trying to analyze every person you meet, but because you've learned something far more valuable. You've learned to pay attention. In today's world, attention has become increasingly rare. People often listen only long enough to prepare their own response. They rush to conclusions. They judge before understanding. They react before observing. But real connection asks something different. It asks us to slow down, to remain present, to remember that every person carries experiences we cannot see. Every stranger has a history. Every friend has hidden worries. Every confident face has known moments of doubt. Every quiet person has thoughts they may never fully express. When you begin looking at people through that perspective, something remarkable happens. Patience replaces frustration. Curiosity replaces assumption. Compassion replaces judgment. And conversations become something more than an exchange of words. They become opportunities to understand another human being. Remember, there is no gesture that tells the whole story. No expression that explains an entire life. No single conversation that reveals everything about a person. Human beings are wonderfully complex. That's not a problem to solve. It's something to appreciate. As you continue through your own life, keep observing, keep listening, keep asking thoughtful questions. Allow people the space to surprise you. Allow yourself the humility to admit when you don't yet know the full story. Because the strongest relationships are rarely built by people who always have the right answers. They're built by people who are willing to understand before they decide. If this audiobook has offered you one lasting lesson, let it be this. Let it be this. Every interaction is an opportunity to make someone feel heard, to make someone feel respected, to make someone feel understood. You may never fully realize the impact of that gift. A few extra moments of attention, a little more patience, a little more kindness. Sometimes those simple choices stay with another person far longer than we ever imagine. Thank you for spending this time here. I hope these ideas can continue to accompany you long after this audiobook ends, not only in the conversations you have, but in the way you see the people around you. May you continue to observe with wisdom, listen with empathy, speak with sincerity, and approach every relationship with an open mind. Because when we truly learn to understand others, we don't simply become better communicators, we become better friends, better partners, better leaders, and ultimately, better human beings. Until next time, take care of yourself and never stop being curious about the extraordinary people you meet along the way.